For 30 seconds, the USS Nimitz was under the electronic equivalent of a gun barrel. A Chinese destroyer had locked fire control radar on America's most powerful warship. 30 seconds standing between calm and catastrophe. But why didn't the Nimitz respond with overwhelming force? And what does that restraint reveal about a strategy built not on missiles fired, but on decisions withheld? Stay with us because this moment was not an accident. It was a calculated move that could define the balance of power in the South China Sea. How did a confrontation in open waters escalate to the point where one captain believed he could justify locking onto the United States' most lethal warship? To answer that, you have to know how it began and the chain of choices that slowly forced the clash into the open. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. The USS Princeton had been tasked with something that, on paper, looked routine. It was a freedom of navigation patrol designed to press through waters Beijing claimed as its own, but that international law considered open to everyone. At first, there was nothing unusual. The cruiser pushed through the South China Sea at a steady pace, its sensors sweeping sky and sea, charting what looked to be another ordinary transit. But at 200 kilometers, the Princeton marked a distinctive contact, a Chinese Type 052D, a modern destroyer known for its vertical launch system and long-range missiles. That initial reading could have meant nothing. Ships shadow each other all the time. But what mattered next was how that destroyer moved. The change began with speed. The Chinese captain ordered a surge, quickly driving the vessel up to 30 knots. The intention was plain. This was acceleration, not for safe navigation, but to force urgency on the American side. At sea, speed translates to posture. When a warship suddenly accelerates and adjusts its heading toward another, no broadcast message is needed. The geometry tells the story. It says, I am intent on closing distance. It tries to pull the other vessel into a responsive action, forcing it to maneuver, to speak, to acknowledge pressure. Why would Beijing give one captain license to risk that kind of action? Because at its core, this encounter was not about two ships testing seamanship. It was about shifting boundaries of power. The Chinese leadership had been pressing harder to demonstrate resolve, and in this patrol, the order was clear. Provoke, but keep the Americans from firing first. By doing so, China hoped to demonstrate that it could bend traffic patterns even against a powerful adversary. That instruction handed local commanders an unusual authority to push into a zone where one wrong calculation could ignite combat. This authority wasn't careless. It was designed to signal that Beijing had crossed a line into deliberate confrontation. At sea, intent is never written in plain language. It is calculated by watching a ship's bearing, by plotting how quickly it narrows range, and by how predictably, or unpredictably, it cranes across another's bow. That evening, the Princeton's crew did not need slogans over the radio to read intent. They could see it coded in maneuvers, in the tempo of the Chinese destroyer rushing forward, and in the silence of its bridge as it ignored routine calls. The American response did not play into that rising tempo. Rather than roaring back on the radio or flooding channels with threats, the Princeton documented everything. Positions, times, communication attempts, and radar pings were quietly logged in minutes and seconds. This was not an emotional contest. It was a record built for after-action clarity. Every detail would establish who pressed, who pushed closest, and who maintained control. Still, the advantage was not only in conduct, but in technology. The Princeton carried a radar suite that could track hundreds of targets across vast distances, building a complete picture of the tactical environment. By contrast, the Chinese destroyer's sensors had a narrower reach. That meant while the Chinese ship sprinted forward, its captain could see only a portion of the American view. The Princeton had the upper hand from the first contact, able to watch angles change and threats unfold long before any true danger materialized. That sensor dominance mattered because it gave the Americans the chance to choose. They could hold their course without losing situational awareness. They never needed to fall into the trap of urgent maneuvering. The Chinese commander had intended to force initiative, but steady American restraint shifted initiative back to U.S. control. The record was clear: aggression met by discipline, provocation blunted by surveillance reach. By the end of the surface exchange, the contest had already been decided in one sense. Escalation could not undo the fact that the Princeton had seen first and understood first. Even as Beijing sought to apply pressure, it was the American cruiser defining the rhythm of the encounter. This was how control survived in tense waters, not through shouted warnings, but through calm use of superior systems. And yet what played out between hulls was just the visible portion of the confrontation, because while surface maneuvers made headlines, the more decisive struggle was already unfolding in two invisible arenas: the skies above and the depths below, where entire domains collided. The standoff ended not with gunfire, but with the Chinese ship breaking off, its provocation blunted by the weight of American control across every domain. Surface sensors, airborne patrols, and submarine shadows had already surrounded the encounter, leaving Beijing with no pathway to escalate without risking a crippling defeat. In crowded waters like those, survival depends less on missiles loaded and more on who sees first, who decides first, and who holds nerve under pressure. Stay with us, because in the next episode, we'll uncover how Chinese aircraft tried the same tactics and discovered airspace was no safer.